Sorry, Jim. Yep.
Would you like lights?
Yeah. Time to wake up.
Right.
I want to thank everyone for showing up early today, because we did change the start time to 8:30 instead of our normal 9. I think we'll still find a few people coming in a little bit later. I also want to personally thank Virgil for putting this agenda together. The last few months have been pretty hectic for me because of the changes at CNC, and Virgil really took the leadership on this. So he's the chair of the Telecom. I'm the vice chair today. So it's a team effort. Yeah, I really appreciate it. So the minutes are back there. We don't have it on the agenda. I don't know that we formally approve the minutes every time. So everybody, make sure you get them, look over them. If you have any questions or concerns, let us know. Let's go around and do introductions. We'll start here to my right.
The light is on, then the mic is on.
Tim Corrigan, Routt County Commissioner.
Jack Taylor, Steamboat Springs.
Don Mathis, Republican Party Chairman, Routt County.
Jennifer Price, AT&T.
Jordan Kelson, Club 20 Administrative Assistant.
Chris Holstrom, San Miguel County Commissioner.
You guys know me, Jimmy Scarman College.
Virgil Turner, City of Montrose. Chris Kennedy, Region 10, Broadband Project Director and Grand Junction City Council.
Janet Farman, Mount Crested Butte Town Council.
Cindy Dozier, Hinsdale County.
Hi, Kelly Shephard, Fast Track Communications out of Durango.
We'll come here to the back.
Richard Swingle, citizen of Grand Junction.
Okay.
Les Merman, just got here. How are you? See, Reg.
Hi, George Rossman with Congressman Scott Tipton's office.
I'm Terry Lammers from Norwich, DeLange.
Joanne Snyder, manager from San Miguel County, Garden, Colorado. Karen Harkin with Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, Shephard.
And, sorry.
Reporter with Neo Connect out of Gillow Springs.
And who do we have on the phone this morning?
Go ahead. This is Ben Challenge, essentially. I'm having a hard time hearing you guys, so if you get closer to the mic, that'd be helpful.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this is Ben Tidwell from Erie County. Julie Westendorf from Lyon County. Miriam Gillow-Wiles, Southwest Colorado Council of Governments, and I agree with Abel. We possibly get a little closer to the microphone. It's really hard to hear. And this is Eric Bergman and Brandy, DeLange in Denver from GTI. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, I think that's everybody. And kick off, I believe it's Eric and Brandy. So take it over, Eric.
Okay, thank you so much, Virgil and Jim. Thanks for the invitation today. And hello to our commissioners who were there in the room and on the phone. It's good to hear everyone's voices this morning. I'm Eric Bergman. I'm the policy director here at Colorado County Incorporated. And Brandy.
I'm Brandy DeLange. I'm a policy and research advocate here at TCI as well.
And we're going to give just a few minutes, give a broadband update from the Capitol, and then have time for questions from the group as we go forward. TCI this session was trying to bring 2 bills forward that concern broadband in some capacity or another. The first one that was introduced was Senate Bill 42 by Minority Leader Bergman over in the Senate. This one would have basically repealed Senate Bill 152 from 2005. This is the prohibition on local governments using public funds for broadband infrastructure without first going to a vote. That bill died, I guess, a week ago Monday in the Senate Business, Labor, and Technology Committee on a party line vote. We were trying to work with the telecom community on this one a little bit, but there's continued concerns over overbuilding and unfair competition, and so that one we weren't able to get, finally able to get out of committee, but we had a great hearing. We had remote testimony from all around the state. We had people from up in Route County. We had people from Eastern Plains. We had Rio Blanco was on remote testimony. San Miguel County. Miriam was on from the SWCOG down in Durango, and we had some economic development people from Durango as well. So a lot of voices from around the state, kind of trying to underscore the need for better broadband service in our rural areas. But again, unfortunately, that bill did die in committee. Our second bill that we're bringing this session is actually going to be up next week. It was scheduled for today, but we had it laid over. We're still working with some stakeholders on it. It's House Bill 1174, and it concerns, there's been a statute on the books for a number of years that allows counties to form LIDs, local improvement districts, to provide telecom service. We are, at the behest of Park County, we're trying to alter that statute a little bit to expand it to broadband and also to allow the current statute requires that if you do a LID, that any infrastructure has to be owned and maintained by the telecommunications provider. And our point, at least in Park County and many rural parts of the state, is if we had a telecom provider that was already providing service, we wouldn't need to go to the voters and form a LID to finance the infrastructure. So this bill would allow us to own and maintain the infrastructure, the middle mile that we're building with assessments from our landowners, from communities in these rural areas. So Representative Jim Wilson is our sponsor on that bill. Also, Representative Barbara McLaughlin, the new House member from Southwest Colorado, is a co-sponsor of that bill. And also Representative Valdez from the San Luis Valley is on that bill. And so we'll be up in Business Affairs, in the House Business Affairs Committee, probably early next week. We're still trying to work on some amendments to the bill to address some of the concerns from the telecom member providers. So, and then on our third bill, I'm going to turn it over to Brandy really fast for an update on, and Brandy, go ahead.
Thank you, Eric. So, as Eric mentioned, CTI had 3 legislative priorities this session, and the third was very unique in that one that I think you all are fairly familiar with, especially down there. San Miguel County had leased out some fiber from Tri-State in order to provide middle mile coverage and light up fiber to provide broadband access and services to folks in their county. But, however, when they leased out this fiber from Tri-State, it turned the easement from a utility easement into a commercial easement, putting them in a predicament of revisiting with folks that they had already visited with to secure their utility easements, and then going back to secure a commercial easement. Fortunately, in some cases it did work, and San Miguel and the Tell Your Right Foundation were able to figure out a method in which they could provide compensation to folks. But in many cases, there were some property owners who just weren't willing to have another easement on their property. So in turn, San Miguel submitted this legislative issue to us in October. Because of the nature of the issue, because when we talk about perfecting easements, and I put perfecting in quotations because it's not truly a legal definition, when we talk about perfecting easements, there's an underlying issue of condemnation or eminent domain or takings, words that we are all very, very hesitant to use, especially in the legislature. Because of these words and because of the connotations associated with them, we had an uphill battle before we even started to begin to work on this issue. We were fortunate enough to secure Your bill sponsor, Barbara McLaughlin, again from La Plata, was very willing to work with us and was very excited about the issue. But because of the electric nature of it, House leadership had several concerns, and they were quite concerned about the potential of Representative McLaughlin losing her seat because she's in such a competitive district. So we went back to the drawing board after a while and said, okay, great, we'll re-explain the policy to you, we'll re-explain the current circumstances to you, and hopefully we can get somewhere. After re-explaining policy to House leadership staff, they granted the representative late bill status, but that seems to be somewhat a bit of a placeholder for them to some extent. Again, after speaking with House leadership staff again, the representative ultimately decided that she was not comfortable running a bill and would rather spend some time this year working on researching some mandatory questions. For example, are there other states that are facing a similar situation as we are? This seems to get us somewhere initially. However, House leadership and House leadership staff visited again with the representative after she had come back from visiting with her district, and ultimately decided, because this issue is so electrifying and because there are so many perceived conceptions about takings or eminent domain, that ultimately they just don't want her near this issue right now. So we're going to find a way forward. I know that Senator Corm is very interested in this issue as well, and we're going to research something, and we're going to try to figure out a solution, whether it's legislative or something else. I'm really happy to take any questions for you all, but I would just say, if you happen to run into Representative McLaughlin, any of you, say thank you to her. This was a very heavy lift, especially for a freshman legislator, and we really do appreciate her trying her hardest to be our bill sponsor on this one.
Thanks, Brandy. This is Eric again. I know Miriam is going to be talking in a few minutes more about this perfection of easements as it relates to some of the work they're doing down there in southwest Colorado as well. And I think they're looking at possibly some congressional help as maybe part of the solution on this. So we'll look forward to hearing what she has to say on it at 9:10 this morning. A couple other things. I think Brian Shephard is presenting also this morning. The governor announced in his State of the State speech that he was putting broadband, he was elevating it to a much higher priority in his administration for the remaining 2 years, pledging to try to connect more rural households. He is going to be announcing a new broadband czar here in the next week or so. They've been very hush-hush. We've all been trying to pry information out of the governor's office on who this person will be. We're very interested to see how that shapes up. I think, to some degree it will be, old wine, new bottles, because they've already got, pretty good staff working on broadband for the state. But at least I think this will be a way to elevate the issue and put more of a spotlight on it, and hopefully more priority, and hopefully more dollars and other resources being dedicated to it. Before we go to questions, I also wanted to give a quick plug. Many of you I know attend the Mountain Connect conference every summer. This is probably the preeminent broadband conference in Western United States right now. People come from out of state for this thing. It's a fantastic get-together. It's May 22nd to 24th in Keystone this year, and Audrey Danner is one of the founders of it and a close friend and ally here at CCI. I also want to mention that we're going to be putting on a session of our own on broadband at the CCI Summer Conference in Keystone, which will be a week later, June 5th to June 7th. So for those of you commissioners who are planning to come, we plan to hopefully get this new broadband czar to come and speak and have a roundtable and include the telecommunications industry in this one, and try to get past the kind of entrenched positions we've had the last few years and see if there's a way we can all work together to advance our mutual need. With that, I'd like to go ahead and open it up for questions for Brandy or myself from the room. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions from around the table or in the room? If not, I have one. Brandy, this is Virgil Turner. Thank you both, Eric and Brandy, for being on the phone with us and giving us an update of what's happening at CCI and in the General Assembly. Brandy, it seems like I had run across some in the CRS the ability of municipalities to use their powers of eminent domain external to the city to extend utility services, and I think that this was probably designed to construct water lines and other types of utilities, maybe not initially determined to be telecom utilities, but have you looked at the existing CRS to see if there are other examples that could be expanded upon rather than just a new bill to allow counties to exercise eminent domain for telecom?
So Virgil, I'm having a little difficulty hearing you, but I think your question was, did we look at CRS to see if we could find other examples of condemnation that local governments have? Is that your question? Other examples of condemnation power that they have?
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and actually, when we originally thought that perhaps we would have late bill status, we tried to put together some language that mirrored current condemnation power authority that local governments, and specifically counties, have. But I think the nuance here is that because broadband is not considered a utility, it puts us in a very unique position in that local governments obviously have the authority to condemn for, as you mentioned, things like sewers or roads or utility lines. But once we start getting into that commercial header, we no longer have the authority to do so. So one of the thoughts we did have was to mirror off of the authority that you all have to condemn for like a veteran memorial site that would either require a vote of your constituents, or alternatively the other option that we weighed was mirroring it similar to your ability to condemn for safe ditches. Those were two possibilities that we definitely considered. We also took into account the potential of our 152 efforts not passing, so we made it contingent upon 152 as well. But I think the thing to remember with this issue specifically is that while we are thinking about it under the header of broadband, the legislature was not thinking about it under the header of broadband, and rather thinking under the header of private property rights or condemnation, and that is the third rail for the legislature, and especially for folks who consider themselves strong advocates of private property rights.
All right. Thank you, Brandy. Any other questions?
Yeah.
All right.
Cricket.
Thank you so much, Eric and Brandy. Go ahead. Eric, did you have anything else?
No, I think that's all we have right now. I will tell you that we're meeting this afternoon, CML and CCI, with House Majority Leader Becker to discuss broadband in a larger kind of framework as far as things that might be done still this session and going forward. For those of you who don't subscribe to our newsletter, we do a weekly newsletter. We'll have the results. Obviously, this bill will be up next week on the lid bill, and we'll have hopefully be able to get that out of committee next week. So, other than that, we appreciate everything you guys do, and
thank you for having us and inviting us to share our legislative priorities with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All right, Miriam, are you ready?
Well, I better be, right? First off, thank you for letting me call in. I have some meetings that I couldn't get out of this afternoon, which is hard to drive up and back. Unfortunately, we haven't yet perfected teleportation. So I'm the executive director of the Southwest Council of Governments. I've met probably the vast majority of you, or if I haven't, I'm looking forward to. We are the far southwest corner of Colorado. This region, we're just south of San Miguel County. It is San Juan, Dolores, Montezuma, La Plata, and Archuleta County. We're really far away from everything. And the SWCOG has been working on broadband since its inception in 2010, which feels like a lot longer ago than 7 years even. So I'm going to talk about easement perfection, and luckily, Brandy and Eric mentioned that beforehand, and which kind of helps me a little bit. They teed it up nicely. So easement perfection, and I was going to do a PowerPoint for you all, but I couldn't figure out how to make this not the most boring PowerPoint on the face of the planet. So, what is an easement? An easement is the right to a private or individual, or entity's land, so we can run power lines, water lines, roads, all that kind of stuff across it. So speaking of power lines and power utilities, most electrical companies have telecommunication devices or telecommunication infrastructure related to their their electrical infrastructure. So, such as fiber, they use that to monitor their own equipment and all of that. For example, Tri-State owns fiber to manage and operate their equipment and their infrastructure across western Colorado and the Intermountain West. Telecommunication infrastructure for utility can only be used for that utility and is not allowed for commercial use without the action of that easement. And I also put perfection in quotes, much like Brandy, because it really isn't doing anything besides renegotiating and reissuing that easement for commercial use versus utility use on that fiber infrastructure. So what we need to do is to change that telecommunication infrastructure to commercial use. The utility, the internet service provider, government, or whatever other entity like the Telluride Foundation, they have to negotiate with each and every landowner to utilize the existing utility easement for commercial use. And I'm going to emphasize this. This easement already exists. It is, and frequently the telecommunication infrastructure is already in place, such as DMEA or Tri-State or down here, La Plata County Electric, LPEA. Let me toss out some more acronyms for you as well. So what we have to do is we have to renegotiate for the use of an existing infrastructure or to install, in this new telecommunications infrastructure. An example of the installation of new telecommunications infrastructure was the fiber that was hung on the Tri-State poles between Purgatory Ski Resort here in La Plata County and San Juan County up in Silverton up in San Juan County. And that was done in 2 years. So it's new infrastructure. So all this renegotiation has the same issues of negotiating a new easement, which is fraught with problems to begin with, and that's landowners can be slow or just don't communicate. Landowners can demand extraordinary amounts of money, and landowners can refuse to negotiate, which And also this takes a lot of time to do. Not that this isn't, those aren't important aspects, working with the landowners, but it can inhibit any sort of broadband development in some areas. Or we can have 10 landowners and 9 of them agree to it and are willing to use this, and the 10th landowner says, no, screw you guys, and then we go and have to figure out how to build around that, which is an additional cost and time and effort. So this hurdle of easement perfection creates roadblocks, increases costs, and lengthens the time to broadband deployment, especially in rural areas where the utility telecommunications infrastructure is probably the shortest and simplest connections between communities. So we've been working on some potential solutions, and Virgil or anybody else from Region 10 up there might be able to mention or talk a little bit about what one of the other things that they're being worked on as well. So Senator Bennett's office had asked us to provide them a letter with some information and potential solutions for this problem of easement perfection. And we've been working with the whole federal delegation here down in Southwest Colorado and state agencies such as CCI to figure out how to do this standardization. So what we thought of is, like, let's standardize some costs. How about X dollars per mile for standardization, or X dollars per mile a federal tax credit? So that way, the ISPs, government, whoever, the state doesn't have to shell out a big bag of cash, but the landowners are also being compensated fairly, because that is an important aspect, like I said. So we've been working with Bennett, Gardner, and Representative Benton to create these updates, and we're thinking that it could potentially be included in the tax code overhaul during that simplification, especially since Senator Bennett's on the Finance Committee. Big caveat on that, and given the challenges and the raucous environment in D.C., your breath. It's going to be a very long, it's going to be a long process if it's, but I think it's important to have the ball start rolling. Some of the other things that we're working on, and this is where Region 10 comes into play, is an enterprise zone in some of these communities. So Region 10 created an enterprise zone to allow the donation of easements by private landowners for a 12.5% state tax credit. And Region 10 has the vast majority of that area is considered an enterprise zone, while down here in Region 9, the SWCOG region, we've also had this discussion, and we'll have a little bit more with at the board level. Our enterprise zone is a little bit more spotty, and we have a few less areas that are eligible for it. However, I still think it could be a potentially really good start solving some of these issues. What else? I'm happy to send out the letter that we sent to the federal delegation. I sent it out to all the different COGs in the state. I find this to be a real nonpartisan issue. Broadband in rural Colorado is important. We've heard about this for years. It's economic development, it's access to education, access to healthcare, and it's vital to community vitality, especially in our areas that have seen a loss in jobs with reduction of extraction. That's coal, oil, and gas. And broadband typically increases home values by 3 to 5%. And down here, we have an average of a 10% telecommuting workforce. But if we included everybody who had like a little Etsy store or eBay store or some other sort of online part-time gig, it actually increases to about 20% workforce. So it's a really vital issue across the western, actually not just western Colorado, but Central Mountains, Eastern Plains, and the entire Rocky Mountain West for that matter. It is larger than just us. So that's sort of what we're working on. I don't know how far we'll get this congressional season, but I think it's important that we continue to work on it, both at the state and the federal level. That's it. I talk fast.
Miriam, could you give us the reasons for consideration of this in the tax code? Is that for potential tax credits. Give us the nexus.
I only got about a third of your sentence, or your question. It was something about official tax credit, but I didn't hear the first part of it.
I'm having a bit of trouble understanding the nexus for this issue in the tax code rewrite. If you could explain that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so Bennett's been trying to figure out the solution, and Bennett's and Gardner's and Tipton's office all know how challenging broadband is out here. And so they had asked for some solutions, and we were spitballing with Bennett's staff the other day, well, a few months back, and they said, what about a standardization of easements of that cost? Because that's part of the issue is it's hard to budget for easement perfection when we don't have a standardization of cost. You can have one landowner that's happy to take $6, and you can have another landowner that wants $6 million. And so it's great to know it's one more challenge in this rural broadband. So the standardization of cost was, well, is there a way to, one, standardize potential costs that an ISP might have to pay, or is there another way to standardize that cost at a federal level that would then be a federal benefit but not have to have any out-of-pocket cash for the local agencies? And that's where the federal tax credit came from.
Okay, thanks, Miriam. About questions for Miriam? It's a somewhat complex issue. I know a lot of governments that are working on this broadband issue are running into. I've got some questions for Miriam. She's at the heart of this discussion.
I guess my question is not necessarily for Miriam, it would be for the room larger, but what I'm hearing are inducements for easement owners to provide access. I'm not hearing anything where we would be able to compel those easements. Is that correct?
Miriam, you can answer that, or I can take a stab at it. The way it's been described.
Can someone repeat? I couldn't really hear much of what the question was.
I think the question was regarding whether this issue is compelling landowners to provide these easements or inducements for landowners to provide these easements. In the way it's been explained to me in property rights is...
How many landowners does this affect? Is that essentially the question?
Yes, whether this is more of an issue of compelling them to provide these easements or inducing them to provide the easements, the property owner. Is that right?
I'm sorry, there's a little bit of background noise, and it's sort of fading in and out with your questions, Virgil.
Yeah, if everyone has that's on the phone is on a cell phone or a landline, if you could please mute your phones if you're not actively speaking, that may help the rest of us to hear. There's been some background noise, and I'll try it again.
Okay.
Did you hear the question, Miriam?
No, I heard that it relates to landowners and the protection of easements, but I couldn't quite tell what the actual question was.
Whether what you're proposing and what our senators are looking at is whether we can compel or induce a property owner to provide these easements. I'll take a stab at that. Property rights, such as easements, have been described to me as a bundle of sticks, and property rights can be many different flavors, and an easement is just one of those. And a commercial easement on an existing fiber is just one of those sticks in the bundle. And every time you want to acquire a property right across property, it has to be a specific right, and it has to be obtained just like any other property right. And so it's not really compelling or inducing. You have to have a willing seller and a buyer that's willing to pay the price. And that's typically the way eminent domain enters into a bit of a different flavor to it. But eminent domain is not it's a taking, but it's a taking at a fair market value. And so the challenge is the impacts on property owners that have a fiber that's already existing running across their property. The additional right has a very small impact on them. You're not talking about linemen crossing the property again to hang fiber. And so I think some of the work that Eric and Brandy and Miriam are working on or trying to figure out is there ways that we can simplify the process by reducing tax credits or enterprise zone credits. And I'll turn it over to Chris Kennedy with Region 10 and also the Grand Junction City Council. But Region 10 has been successful in designating these projects as an enterprise zone in which the property owners can receive a further inducement as an enterprise zone tax credit.
Thanks, Virgil. I think from a Region 10 perspective, one of the key challenge to meet to successfully, wow, there's a lot of feedback on there from a cell phone. If you guys could mute, that would be appreciated. I think the successes to rural broadband lie in the participation of the rural electrical co-ops. They have infrastructure in place in a lot of cases that meet the transport needs via fiber to deliver quote-unquote commercial services, and what by that we mean is broadband services to rural communities. To Miriam's point and the whole conversation around perfection of easements, the question that we've been debating for months is what's the value of that easement, how you judge the value of that easement against the portion of the property those lines run down. And by successfully, and a lot of this credit goes to the Telluride Foundation and Paul Major for the work that they were doing for the state the state income tax credit that ultimately was approved, is providing some value to those landowners in the form of a tax credit at the state level that makes it easier for them to donate those easements for commercial purposes. It's, to Virgil's point, it's another stick in the bundle. It's another inducement, to your point. And I think the combination of working those tax credits on the state and local level and tying those into federal tax credits will do a lot more to create some of that inducement. But ultimately, from my personal view, the success of delivering broadband telecommunications in rural communities, there has to be that carrot and stick. The inducement piece has to be there, but the power to condemn, to be able to, especially as Virgil alluded to, is cable's already up in there. You're not disturbing soil or running on property to add a service on a fiber that's already running through that community. And then the challenge in the easement perfections, when you can be, that's a 30-mile fiber run, for example, and maybe there's 110 landowners and you get 109 of them, but the one you can't is an absentee landowner and it's owned in some trust, and you have to go through many, many levels of papers to try to figure out who finally can grant that easement. And if you can't find them, you're kind of limited. So I think there's also a conversation to be had around how do we deal with the 99% agree and the 1% you can't find. I think there needs to be some work to find a workaround for that as well. Because that one holdout, and for valid or invalid reasons, is it's essential that we be able to find a way to overcome that obstacle. Because I don't think there's anybody that disagrees that broadband infrastructure deployment in rural communities is, to me, it's comparable to telephone infrastructure deployment in the early 20th century. It's the third rail of our economic development and our ability to participate in a 21st century economy that's essential for rural communities, especially to compete in today's market. So I know I went around a long way doing it, but the 12.5% tax credit based on the percentage value of that easement, it doesn't necessarily amount to a lot, and that's also a challenge. So tying that into a federal tax credit as well would provide a further incentive, I think, to help drive the easement perfection conversation.
I think one of the, go ahead, sir.
So, how would we address that one property owner out of 100? Is that something to be addressed in state statute?
You know, again, it's a property right issue, and property rights are a fairly sacred matter in our state law. So I think it's going to be challenging to do something that may be perceived as taking away a property right from someone without due process. And so I think one of the best time to obtain the commercial fiber easement is at the time that the utility easement is being obtained. And one of the challenges that we've seen, and Chris talked about this a little bit, is the biggest owner of fiber in rural Colorado, long haul fiber, is our utility companies, the Tri-State, WAPA. Those folks have been putting up fiber for a number of years. The Tri-State line, that was called PathNet, that runs from Grand Junction to Albuquerque, they had the foresight to actually obtain commercial easements when that was first put in. And so that's been our lifeline for Western Colorado. Unfortunately, a lot of the new lines that Tri-State's putting in, it's been the policy of this Tri-State board not to ask for the commercial easement. In fact, I was involved in a selling of a commercial easement from the city to Tri-State, and I asked them, could you please put commercial easement, we're giving you this, we don't want any extra money, but we'd like to have it in the language. And they said, no, it's against our policy to do that. And so I think one thing that we could do is talk to, if you're a member of a Tri-State cooperative, talk to your Tri-State cooperative board member that attends those Tri-State board meetings, and let them know that this is an issue that we need to be thinking about. I think the tide is starting to turn with the board, but I think they have always viewed themselves as a power organization and not a broadband organization. Unfortunately, the communities they serve need the broadband. And in my way of thinking, this should be something that should be driven to improve our ability to provide broadband. This not only helps governments, but private carriers as well, because they need that easement, commercial easement access as well. So will help all of us achieve better broadband throughout Club 20 if we can start working on this at every angle. Any questions for Miriam?
I don't know if it's for Miriam, but I do have a question, and partly I'm new to this discussion, and I apologize, I'm sure y'all covered this, but maybe I'm not the only one who doesn't understand. When we were in Denver, a lot of the comments from the legislators who spoke to us and what they said, the governor had said was they are starting to call this a utility rather than a luxury. Why are we not approaching this? What does it take to approach this as a utility rather than commercial?
Anyone want to tackle that? Miriam, do we have to?
Well, I
I can attempt to do that. I can't promise I'll have much of an answer. The FCC has to define, or excuse me, the federal government has to define broadband as a utility. I don't believe that the states have the ability to do that by themselves. And in 2015, the FCC did come up with a rule defining broadband as a utility. It was never ratified by Congress, and so at this point, broadband is not considered a utility. So it is relatively unregulated, unlike roads, sewers, waters, or excuse me, not roads, but sewer, water, electricity, things like that. But I'm not a lawyer, so I might play one on occasional TV, but I'm definitely not a lawyer.
Go ahead, Patty.
Actually, I just, turn it on. Okay, am I on? Okay. I didn't have a question, but I wanted to add something to this conversation because DMEA came up and using the utilities. And I just wanted everyone to know that's not a DMEA member, that the Rural Utility Services, which is one of our divisions, I'm Patty Snyder with USDA Rural Development, sorry for those of you that I haven't met. And we fund the rural utilities. So we fund the power plants and the transmission lines. We're their lender. So within their system of lending under our rural utility services, the rural electrics can access funding, which is what DMEA is doing, which is actually for smart grid technology. It was put in place by Congress for smart grid technology, but it's actually funding for fiber to the meter. So they can run fiber to every single electrical meter they serve. And in the language of that lending, of that money, it encourages them to partner with private sector, with public sector. So it encourages them to use open access and to create partnerships where they can actually sell that service or lease out that service. So they have an access to an exclusive line of funding, if you will. It's a loan, but it's usually lent at treasury rate, which we know where treasury is right now, and amortized out like 40 years. So it's very, for the money, it's very good money. But just so you know that the REAs can access this funding, so they can access it anywhere. And it's exclusively for them. So it's another good reason why you want your REA at the table and being a part of this. That's my story.
Hi, this is Julie Westendorf. Could I ask a question before we leave this topic?
Sure.
That just is, are there downsides to broadband being considered a utility that have become the obstacle, or is that a good route to pursue rather than worrying about tax credits or anything else? Because we already know the rules of condemnation for purposes of roads and utilities, etc. It seems like a shorter route if we could get broadband defined as a utility, because effectively it's superior to telephones. It should be treated at least as well as telephones.
Miriam, has that been part of the discussion with our senators?
Yeah, actually, so I've actually asked that question that, hey, what if we just call broadband a utility? Will that solve these problems? And while it will going forward for new utility easements, it would have to still be defined in that easement, because it's the same thing, just like if you put in a water line, you put in a gas line, unless that's defined, and it would not solve any of the issues of existing easements. So that tri-state line, trying to get from, into city type of thing. So while that is, it's ancillary to this conversation of easement perfection, we still have to define broadband access in those easements, even if broadband is considered a utility.
All right, I'll have Jennifer, you want to comment on this?
Sure. I don't know if Abel's on the line. He might have a better perspective on this than I do. But I would say broadband, for all the conversations that we are having about utilities, that terminology is concerning in the broadband industry because we're not a utility. This is a high-tech, R&D intensive, constantly changing industry that is a 21st century technology. And I think there's a lot of concerns in the industry about talking about 20th century regulatory environments, and particularly when we start talking about things like eminent domain and that sort of regulatory environment, and trying to layer that over the top of 21st century technologies that, frankly, by the time I finish this sentence, will have changed substantially. So we're moving fast, and you know, if you're familiar with Moore's Law, I mean, what is happening in this industry is a lot of advancement, and that comes from a lot of R&D and a lot of focus on high technology. And so I think we feel very concerned when we start comparing things like broadband and this industry with, you know, sort of copper wires in the ground and regular telephones. It's very different. It's apples to oranges. And so, you know, and I would say, I heard earlier someone refer to this industry, the broadband industry, as relatively unregulated. That is not accurate. We are highly regulated by the FCC, by the FTC, by a variety of regulatory bodies that we report to, that look at a lot of what we do. And you know, I think to argue that this is not a regulated industry isn't quite accurate. But I would say from the broadband perspective, we can't lose sight of the fact that not only is this a high-tech industry, but we want it to be a high-tech industry. And you see a lot of differences in how this technology has advanced over time. And I think that's where the concern comes from the industry when we start using terms like utility.
I guess from my perspective, when I think about what you just said, and I agree it's a high-tech industry, but I don't know that it's AT&T or CenturyLink that's really building that high-tech equipment. It's Cisco, it's Juniper, it's those individuals, and we're talking about literally putting a switch in and lighting up that piece of fiber to provide telecom, to provide broadband. So I'm not quite on your page, and forgive me for that, but it is a high-tech industry, and I'm sorry, if we called it a utility, I don't believe that high-tech industry is going to change.
And I completely understand that perspective. I will say we could sort of agree to disagree on that, but I will say to say that AT&T is not involved in the R&D side is not accurate. We have AT&T Labs. AT&T, we just announced some great new technologies out of AT&T. We are constantly in the field testing new technologies that are coming out of AT&T Labs, and that is just us. And we are one player in this industry, and folks are constantly trying to move ahead of one another. And we have R&D in-house. Most of our competitors have R&D in-house, and we're doing a lot of that work. So, you know, we can sort of agree to disagree on the utility conversation, but I would say we are a high-tech company doing high-tech things.
And to that point, AT&T Labs has been around for years, and when they were dealing with just telco, they were doing the research and development, and it was considered a utility. So I don't believe that calling this a utility is going to change. You're going to still work to try to be competitive with every other provider in your cellular business. Everybody's going to be still trying to be competitive. Everybody wants a piece of this market, and calling it a utility is not going to change that.
Brian Shephard from the state of Colorado, broadband manager, has had a comment on easements, I believe.
Yeah, I just wanted to, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Brian Shephard. As Virgil said, I'm the broadband program manager. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on this whole conversation, because this is a very salient conversation, but there is 100 years of background just to kind of let you guys know why we're here. So, you know, when we're talking about broadband, really, we're in the middle of a vast experiment. Every other utility that we have done in our country has been through a highly regulated or through the government. When you look at the Tennessee Valley Authority, that was the government. When you look at the original AT&T, that was essentially the government subsidizing a private company and regulating them. Water, sewer, everything we've done has been in that mold, power. So when Telecom came in again, which is a highly regulated industry, in 1996, the Telecom Act was modified that basically started the process of opening things up in the traditional telephony environment. The problem was that in 1996, we had no idea what we would be looking at in 2017. And so a lot of the laws that were passed in 1996 to kind of open up the CenturyLinks and the Southwest Bells and the old Bell system was supposed to focus on voice, your traditional voice. The problem is obviously the technology has far outpaced that, and so those laws that govern what we think of as telecom are very, very outdated. And I don't think anyone on either side of this would argue that. And so the problem we have is that this broadband thing, when it was created back in the 90s, was a luxury. I think everyone agrees that, you know, back then having that was a luxury. Again, I don't think there's any debate on is this a necessity right now. I think it is true, it is a necessity. The problem we run into though is that, as Jennifer mentioned, the regulatory environment really didn't kind of keep up. And in the 90s we said, hey, this internet thing, let's let it go, let's see where it can go. We don't want to touch it, which I think was a good thing. Now that it's transitioned to more of a necessity, we're stuck with trying to figure out how do we do that? How do we maintain that innovation that the free market got us to where we're at? If you look at broadband technologies over the last 20 years versus telephone technologies over 100 years, the main difference is that we did kind of turn the internet loose and let people do things. So that's what we're wrestling with now. The problem is that the only entity that has the authority to regulate broadband is the FCC, as Jennifer mentioned. I'll disagree and say that they're not nearly as regulated as power or any of the other things, but they are regulated. Whereas Excel has to go into the PUC and say, I want to increase the rates in this area, and here's why. The carriers do not. They can increase or decrease their rates however they want. So the FCC is the only one that can regulate broadband. The state PUC has no authority to regulate broadband whatsoever. Now, the FCC did classify broadband as a Type 2 utility during the Open Internet Order, which was challenged by the carriers and upheld in district courts. Now, because that was through the regulatory process, the current FCC chairman was not a fan of that order, so we anticipate that order being reversed. So we really can't, as we move forward, we can't count on the fact that at the federal level it may or may not be a utility, because unless it's codified in statute, we're going to go back and forth. One FCC is going to say it is, the next FCC is going to say it's not. So I think we have to get creative and figure out how do we move forward with this, absent any congressional statutory definition. And I think I'm probably not the only one in this room that would say the odds of Congress actually doing something productive on this is close to zero. With that said, the easement issue is something we have looked at. We actually, I spent some time with the AG's office looking at this easement issue to see if there was anything we really could do as a state. Unfortunately, there's really not. There was some hope that if the easements were for utilities, that maybe we could kind of pigeonhole this in, knowing that the FCC technically classified as a utility. But unfortunately what we found was most of the power easements are very specific in their language. The easement states the landowner grants the easement holder the right to transmit power over a 12-gauge power line for approximately 13, it was very, very specific about power transmission and power generation. And so when you look at that, to try to kind of, put broadband into there is very, very difficult. Now, occasionally there are a few easements that we found that did say for general utility purposes. In those cases, you might be able to make the argument. But the vast majority, because these easements were so specific for power generation, it's going to make it very, very difficult to do anything other than go get a new easement from that landowner. I know what Chris was talking about, a lot of folks have asked, if the state would support this idea of condemnation, and I think, to our point and Virgil's point, property rights are pretty sacred in our state, and I think ideally finding a solution that does not involve taking of property rights is probably the best way to do this. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of this whole regulatory easement issue. I think we're going to have to get creative and figure things out. there are some great, folks as Patty mentioned, DMEA doing some great things. We're trying to work with Tri-State. So I think that's probably our best bet to move forward, is to really focus this and get creative on trying to find solutions outside of the regulatory environment. Any questions?
Cindy?
Cindy Dozier, Hinsdale County. I guess my question continues to be, is the real only underlying issue that they don't want another easement across their property? What's the backstory of why these property owners do not want this?
I'm Terry Lowers.
Please come to the mic.
And I'm Terry Lammers, and I live in San Miguel County, and I've started talking to some of these landowners. And mostly it's the way that Tri-State handled them and dealt with them. They chose a location to run the line, maybe on a ridge rather than a draw where it would be less visible. They moved things after visiting with the landowners the first time. So really it just kind of left a bad taste in their mouth. And I think if there's some way you could, I don't know what it'd take to require these utilities to run that line and say it could go live when they're laying that fiber optic cable, that would make a huge difference.
Chris Kennedy, I'll follow up. I think the simple answer to that is really relationships. It's the relationships that the landowners have had over the years with some of the bigger power providers that we're talking about, like a Tri-State, excuse me, versus some of the more local co-ops, like a DMEA, who's had a better success rate at getting easement protections for commercial use done with their co-op members. And it really is about relationships between those landowners and the different entities. And by and large, there are many landowners that say, you guys have been here 14 times, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Or you even get to the point where you kind of pit neighbor against neighbor, where you've got the two that surround it say, we need this for the community, and there's another neighbor that, for whatever reasons, that relationship isn't developed to the point where that particular landowner wants to contribute another easement across the property, whether that means somebody's going to touch the property or not.
So is that irretrievable, or is there some way? I know this basically has come forward from San Miguel as well as these other counties, and is there a way to, at least in the meantime, prior to moving forward with legislation and altering utility status, whatever, to move forward in a way that is less formal?
From my perspective, that should be the first approach we're taking, and it goes to the inducement, the relationship building piece. To the condemnation piece, that's a tool in the tool bucket. It's certainly not, I'm not advocating condemnation first, or that's the approach we take. Exercise eminent domain, I agree. The solution is in developing relationships, having people like you go to knock on those doors and talk to those landowners. The best thing you can do is find people that live in those communities to talk to their neighbors, to try to drive the easement conversations to fruition for what we, for lack of a better term, that general good of that community, being able to develop and improve their broadband access capabilities.
Okay, so my last comment then is this idea of eminent domain premature?
And I'll talk from somebody who's been in the broadband telecommunications industry for many, many years, and in a lot of different states. The dynamics that exist in Colorado specifically are a lot different than other places because of the value that the state and the citizens of the state place on property rights. So in other areas, this is not even a conversation. You just make the decision and you do that, and that leaves some citizens thinking, well, why am I not being considered here? For us, it's I don't know that the conversation is premature. I think they're conversations that have in tandem, because ultimately, all of the communities that have overridden SB 05-152 by close to 80% majorities are sending a message that we have a broadband issue, and we're looking to you, our elected leaders, our the people who are responsible for delivering services in our community to solve this issue. When one of the roadblocks to solving the issue is getting an easement granted because the access already exists. It's a fiber line that's on a utility, that's owned by a utility. They're using it for operations needs. You just want to get perfected so those lines can be used for other companies to actually deliver services in those local areas. The challenge is, all right, if your entire community is overwhelmingly supporting you doing something, but the one or two or three or a group of holdouts when it comes to getting easements granted impact that, then I think there's a tandem conversation to be had that's part legislative and part incentive.
Great conversation. Any other comments or questions? All right, before we move on to our next item, I failed to do some housekeeping at the beginning, and I'm trying to bail myself out with Nicole. If you are in need of a restroom, we're in a locked facility here. There's a key card right by the door as you go out of the room, little Prox card. Just by the front office, there's a little black box on the wall next to the glass double doors. The restrooms are just through those doors on the left. So grab a key card. Remember to put it back for the next person coming through. Any other housekeeping matters? Okay.
Just be sure to talk in your mics because
Yeah.
we're recording this. So.
All right.
We are missing one. There's already one gone.
Oh,
There was three.
one key card. Check your pockets. We found it. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, we'll get Brian back to a mic, and you can we can move a mic to you, or you can come up to the table at one of the mics. Brian, and we'll get an update from the Office of Information and Technology with the state. And he's going to announce the broadband czar's name, right?
Thanks, Virgil. So hello again. Just wanted to give everyone an update on what we're focusing on in the state. And as Virgil kind of mentioned, one of the big things is the broadband office. The governor announced it in his State of the State speech back in January. And so we've got a lot of questions about kind of what this means. From a functional perspective, from where you guys are sitting, not a lot is going to change. I'm going to still be out here doing what I'm doing. We've got very similar resources, same projects. Really what it does is it adds kind of an emphasis from the governor's perspective on this. That this is really a priority for the governor and the governor's staff. We are looking at potentially bringing on some more staff. We're looking at the governor's talking about bringing on a broadband czar, so to speak. We had a marijuana czar. We got a couple other czars. I always find it funny that we use that term in our nomenclature in our country, considering the background of the word czar. Somehow it's we would expect that to probably occur sometime in March. So keep an eye out for further announcements. But again, really what we're going to be doing is continuing to focus on the things we're focusing on right now, just kind of giving it more emphasis. We're really going to focus on looking at investment, trying to coordinate things. The other great turn of events that we've had is the new director of the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, Stephanie Copeland, was the president of Zale Corporation, who is a telecommunications company, and before that she was with Quest. So we have even more telecommunications experience in the state government now. Any one of Stephanie's, she's only been there about a month, but it's been great because she's brought other ideas, and I think a lot of the things that we've been kind of trying to push up, just her being there saying yes, that this is an issue, even helps another voice inside the governor's office and the governor's staff to elevate this. So I was with Stephanie yesterday over at DMEA. We sat down with DMEA and really talked through kind of what they're doing and are looking at, okay, how can we as the state help facilitate those types of things? So that's really what we're looking for in terms of the broadband office. Again, probably more things to come in March. So what are we focusing on? Well, one of the things we continue to focus on is the FirstNet initiative. That's kind of my night job, so to speak. And again, for those of you unaware, that's the effort to develop a nationwide public safety network for first responders. that kind of has the same resiliency that our current walkie-talkie, you see the walkie-talkies on first responders' hips. We're trying to build the same type of network for cell phones because they're pretty much reliant upon cell phones and data just like we are. So that's a national project. Been working with public safety entities throughout the state for the last 5 years. And this year should be a big year for this. We basically have to kind of figure out, are we going to hitch our wagon to the national plan, or are we going to kind of strike out on our own and try to build our own network? So we're really focusing with that and engaging public safety officials as well as municipal and county governments on that one. So that's one of the big focuses. We also, at the end of last year, we initiated a agreement with a group called the Education Superhighway. This is a nonprofit, a national nonprofit. It's funded by Gates Foundation, Zuckerberg Foundation, a lot of the other very rich people in the world. And the goal of the Education Superhighway is to make sure that every school in this country has the connectivity it needs. I don't think, again, it's rocket science to say that schools have to have robust broadband to be able to educate our children. And so what we have done is work with them to first identify what the needs are. And the good news is we actually have, most of our schools in the state have the infrastructure they need. They have fiber to them. They are getting good connectivity. We still do have probably about 100 to 130 schools, individual schools, that need fiber connectivity. And in the next year, we're going to be working with this group to identify those districts and work with those districts. There's a federal program called the E-rate program. It's been around for a long time. But now it will pay to actually get infrastructure to schools. So we're going to be focusing on those hardest to reach schools. We've been working with Telluride and Norwood, and I know Chris has been working that in this region, try to get fiber to those schools. The other issue we have, probably more than even the fiber connectivity, is the affordability. So the affordability range for our schools is pretty drastic. We range anywhere from $1.70 a meg in the metropolitan Denver area to $126 a meg in the San Luis Valley. And that's, the ironic thing of that is that school in the San Luis Valley paying $126 a meg can't afford it, and they need it the most because they rely on distance education and remote learning and distance learning more than any other school. So that's the other thing we're going to try to figure out is how do we bring those economics down? How can we look to consolidate, to aggregate, to make sure that schools meet the standard? The national standard says that no school should pay more than $3 a meg for the school connectivity. Again, we realize our state has some challenges. We're probably not going to reach that everywhere, but the more we can get closer to that, I think the better off we'll be. So that's one of the other big things we're working on as well. We continue to work on our infrastructure map, working with CDOT and working with all the DOLE recipients to map infrastructure, figure out where we have assets in our state, mapping community anchor institutions, and really focusing on trying to understand where our needs are from that perspective. We also continue to support DOLA in the regional planning process. Most of the regional plans on the Western Slope are done, so you guys are well on your way. We're still trying to finish up some of the regional plans on the Eastern Plains, the Northeast, East Central, BOCES, Southeast, and the Telluride or the Trinidad area are still working on their regional plans. Now that those regional plans are done, we're trying to help communities figure out, okay, how can we continue to push that? Again, for example, yesterday meeting with the MEA. We talked about how can we maybe make links with WAPA, how can we kind of get San Luis Valley Power Authority, who's doing similar projects into there. And the other thing that we're starting to think about, and this is an idea that's again that Stephanie brought on from her experience with Zayo, is trying to get more creative in terms of bringing people to the table to kind of think big, kind of think about smart city type stuff, lighting up whole cities, integrating wireless and wire technologies in an area. Estes Park has shown some interest in integrating their smart grid technology with creating a Wi-Fi in their downtown tourism area, with reaching all of the residents in the town. And so how again can we facilitate that as a state? And the big thing people ask is there more money? Unfortunately, the DOLA funds have pretty much been spent. The $20 million that DOLA set aside for broadband has been spent. All those grants have been awarded. That does not mean that you cannot go through DOLA's standard process. So again, DOLA has a standard grant process, I think 3 times a year for their mineral impact grants. So an entity can still go through that process and request funds. Just know that you're competing against other things. You're competing against new schools and roads and new sewer lines in communities. And obviously the other drawback is the Supreme Court decision recently is going to really limit the availability of those mineral impact funds in general, as the program has to pay back some of the folks that have previously paid into that mineral impact program. So we are trying to figure out, is there any other way? we do have the broadband board and fund, and we're actually very thrilled. We just put out our first grant application and we closed that out. So we didn't have a whole lot of money. We had $2.1 million, which is not a lot, but it's something. And we were able to grant 7 projects across the state that's going to create broadband access for about 4,500 homes. On the western slope, the town of Ridgeway is going to be upgraded so that they will get at least 25 and 3 down throughout the town of Ridgeway. And then Cherokee County and Lake County were also awarded grants to get some access in the really difficult to reach parts of Lake County. And then the town of Colburn also got a grant for those citizens. So really, some really difficult to reach areas. So we're really pleased with those grants. It was a combination of, some of it were incumbent carriers, some of it was new wireless ISPs, some of it was a little bit of both. So we really spread out the technology, spread it out geographically. There were some grants on the Eastern Plains as well to help some of the towns out there. So we feel really good about what we did there. Now the key is just getting more money. Again, $2.1 million is not a whole lot of money. So we are looking at how can we get that. There's an additional amount of money kind of sitting there ready to be transferred over to the broadband fund, but it is being held up by a lawsuit. Vero has sued the PUC in terms of how they said the PUC was tasked with creating a formula to say how we should transfer money into this broadband fund from the old high cost support mechanism. And Vero has sued the PUC stating that methodology was not properly implemented. And so unfortunately that lawsuit is right now holding up to transfer additional funds to the broadband board. We're hoping that gets resolved here soon, and that potentially in July we could have another round of grant funding with hopefully upwards of maybe $5 million or so that we could put out for broadband grants. So that's really what we're focusing on right now. Obviously the legislative session is going on, keeping our eye on those kind of bills, working with folks to see how we can push things forward that make sense and get better broadband out there. So that's a quick summary of what we're working on and what our focus is. And would welcome any questions that you guys have about anything in particular or anything that I did not cover.
Is that on?
Yep, it is.
Okay, thank you. Jack Taylor, Steamboat Springs. We've heard now, and I'm not here to argue that schools are very important and all the things that have been mentioned, but the only individual area that's been mentioned is Ridgeway. But it's my recollection that somewhere back in the past every individual was paying into a fund that would go to connect. But I haven't heard about any of that, and where I'm really headed with this is individuals need to have that connection too. And that leads to more businesses coming in, which would lead to more money being available. Can you address those issues, please?
Yes, so the broadband fund I talked about actually is that very mechanism you discussed. So the technical term of it is the high cost support mechanism. That has been around for probably 25 years. It was put in place to basically augment what the Fed. So the Fed, most of you heard of the Universal Service Fund, which is the FCC manages a pot of money and gives it out to rural telcos to help out in difficult to reach areas. About 25 years ago, the state said that's not enough. We need even more help here. So the state implemented the high cost support mechanism. That has traditionally gone to support voice connectivity. Most of the money has gone to CenturyLink /US West /Quest as the largest rural incumbent carrier. It also supports some of our rural incumbents on the Eastern Plains and the Western Slope. So that money, there's been a formula for that money. And what the legislation I talked about, that created this broadband board, what it said is, okay, PUC, you need to figure out where we don't really need voice support. So, the poster child was Parker. So 25 years ago, they needed help to provide decent phone service in Parker because no one really lived in Parker 25 years ago. Well, now obviously Parker doesn't really need any help. So what the PUC was tasked with was to say, go through the state, figure out where we don't really need this money for voice service, where there's plenty of companies offering basic voice service. Take that money and put it into this broadband fund. And then they created this broadband board to say, okay, take these grants, so people will come into this broadband fund and ask for grants for actual residential service. So those projects I mentioned with the $2.1 million, those were all for residential projects. So as I mentioned, Cherokee County, Lake County, Ridgeway, Rogan, Sheridan Lakes, and several others. So those companies got grants to go build infrastructure to actually get broadband into people's homes. And so that process is set in place. Unfortunately, this lawsuit, so basically what Vero said is after the PUC did the first round and gave us that $2.1 million, Vero sued the PUC and said, no, you're doing this wrong. And so what that has done is that has held up the money. There's probably $10 to $15 million sitting there, depending on how this lawsuit goes, that could come over so that we could actually put out more grants for more
The
areas.
status of that lawsuit now is what?
It is in state district court. So we're waiting, so the district court just, the good news is they kind of separated it and said there is a piece of money that really should not be, that doesn't really matter here. So potentially they can free up part of that $10, $12 million and transfer part of that over while the rest of it is going through the state district lawsuit. Depending on how the state or the district court rules, there's always they can appeal. So hopefully we'll get some of the money over here soon, and again can start another grant cycle in July. Hopefully it'll be all of it. So, but once that process is done, we will continue to do that. So that fund right now has about $40 million into it, and the goal is to essentially tack down what is going to voice. And then as we do that, tack up what is going to broadband. So that in 2 or 3 years, a vast majority of that fund is going to broadband, and only part of it is going to voice.
And who controls that? Who makes those decisions?
So the board has 16 members appointed by the governor and various folks in the state legislature right now. So I'm currently the chair of that board. So there's 4 state employees. There's industry representatives, AT&T, CenturyLink, Viero, Comcast. Rye Telephone is on there. There's some citizens. There's small business owners from Yuma County. There's the director for the Colorado Telehealth Network is on the board. Jane Blackstone from Steamboat Springs is on the board. Dr. Rick Smith, ex-mayor of Bayfield, is on the board. Mike Brazell and Roger Partridge, 2 county commissioners. So it's really a wide swath of both public and private folks that basically we make the decisions. There's a staff. So that staff person goes out, asks for grants, people come in with the grants, we review them, and then based on the amount of money. So for example, this first round, we actually had 15 people come in and ask for money. They asked for $10 million. We only had 2.5. So
Does it make sense to you, sir, that if there was more capability going out where businesses could get into it, and there's some large businesses out there that have no
Jack,
real
you need to
access.
speak into the mic. Nobody on the phone can hear you.
I'm sorry.
This is a pertinent
My
conversation.
question is whether that, it makes sense to get information, get businesses involved, so that they in turn will be contributing to a fund and be sensitive to wanting to do this and put some money into it.
Well, the contributions to the fund is set in statute. So right now, who contributes is everyone that has voice services. So it's 2.6%. So if you look on your phone bill, you'll see state surcharges. It's 2.6% of your voice service. So when you look at your cell phone bill, if your cell phone bill is $100, probably 20 bucks of that is voice services. The rest is data. So of that $20, 2.6 of that goes into this fund. So we are all, everyone in this room is paying into that fund right now. And again, that is set in statute. Modifying that, so businesses do pay that. So if you're a business and you have voice services, you pay into that as well. So yeah, so everyone's paying into that fund. So really, it's not a matter of not having money in the fund. It's a matter of kind of freeing up. And this fund's been in place for 20 years. It's done. We've been subsidizing very old technology. So it's a matter of kind of undoing what we've been doing. The problem is there are still places in this state that are very, very difficult to reach. There are still people that want a plain old telephone line. They don't want this internet thing, and they just want their old telephone line. One of the other issues, back to the regulatory process, so all of the incumbent carriers, CenturyLink and the other smaller ones, have what's called a provider of last resort. That means no matter if you build a new home, no matter where it is, they have to get you a telephone line. And that's a requirement. Again, it goes back to how we've got to where we're at. So, the problem is if we're going to tell a private company, you have to go serve that home, and the cost is extraordinary to get to that home, we have to subsidize that. That's just the way things have worked. So we're trying to unwind something that's been in place for decades, and it's going to take time. And I think we've got a good start. Again, this lawsuit kind of took us by surprise. It has really kind of just gum things up. So if we can get past this lawsuit, I think we'll be on a good path to get some significant money out there to get projects. Like you said, the projects we awarded ranged everywhere from a small wireless ISP all the way up to CenturyLink. So, we're funding a lot of different technologies. We're funding different companies. We're not doing just the big guys or just the small guys. We're basically coming in and saying, if you have a good idea and if you can serve somewhere, we're going to give you some money to do that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chris?
I have a question developed a strategic broadband plan that envisioned extending fiber optic cable to North Routt County and South Routt County. So to give you an idea of the populations involved, Routt County is about 23,000 people. Most of that population is in the city of Steamboat Springs that is well served at this time. But we have these small population clusters in South Routt and in North Routt. And we've been coming under some criticism from some self-described experts that tell us that we're really wasting our time and money potentially to be really focusing on extending fiber optic cable when we could meet the same capabilities through wireless technologies at a significantly less expense to these smaller areas. Can you comment on that criticism?
I would like to comment on the criticism other than to say we fully believe the ultimate solution involves all technologies. Wireless is a very effective tool. It has gotten better and better and better and more reliable and more reliable. Obviously, fiber is the gold standard. If you could get, if I could wave a magic wand and have everyone in the state have fiber to the home, that would be great. But there's not enough zeros out there to do that right now. So I think when you look at that, I'm going to use Park County for example. So Park County is running fiber to a lot of key institutions, and they're running fiber to areas, but then in one area, in Alma, they did say, look, it's just too expensive to get fiber there. So they ran fiber to a tower, and they're doing a high-speed microwave connection between Fairplay and Alma to provide that middle mile so that they can distribute it to the folks in Alma. So in that scenario, they're using both wireless and fiber. And I think that's what we're going to see, especially on the western slope, is are there areas that are too expensive to get fiber to? Absolutely. Can wireless be there and get the job done? Yes. But we're not setting any standard. We're not telling a community, we're going to tell you what is too expensive and not. We're leaving that up to the communities to figure out what is the best path forward, what resources do you have, what resources do the feds have, and let's figure out a plan. If Routt County can come up with a plan to get fiber into the communities and then distribute it wirelessly, great. If Routt County doesn't have that money and you say, look, we just can't do this, the best way is wireless, we support that. So that's how I would react to your statement.
Even if that service is less than, say, 25 down and 3 up, the best that we would be able to do is say 6 down and 1 up. Is the funding mechanisms, are they still available to support less than that higher standard?
No, so the broadband fund requires that anyone that receives money from the broadband fund, you have to offer 25 and 3 to your end users. That said, I don't know of any wireless technologies that would not get you 25 and 3. Now, based on your propagation, you know, if you look at, and it is the same with mobile cell phone companies. The closer you are to the tower and the better line of sight you have, the more speed you're going to have. So if you're trying to use wireless to get out to a large swath of homes, might there be some homes at the edge of your propagation that don't quite get enough strength to get that 25 and 3? Potentially. Now, would we look at that and say, hey, 90% of the people are getting this and a few aren't, but they're getting a lot better than they have? Yeah, we would take that into account. So yeah, that's what I would do.
Thank you.
All right, Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, I'll add one comment for you. Wireless and fiber are not an either or. You need fiber to backhaul your wireless. So if they are, the more fiber you can get, the closer you get your wireless points, the more bandwidth you can provide. So, question for you on the 2.1 mil broadband fund. I know that there was a story today about Kerry Donovan having a bill shot down in committee, basically holding the PUC to task on why there isn't more money being allocated via the basic service, the taxes on your cell phone bills and other landlines, and allocating more money to that broadband fund. I noticed that, at least in the article I read, that this looked like the PUC voted against more money this time on like and most of the ones that voted no were Front Range PUC members. So I'm interested in two things: the makeup of the PUC and representation for rural communities, and also the representation on the broadband committee that you chair as the representation in the business community, the providers, the government entities that represent rural communities.
Yeah, so first off on the PUC, you know, I would defend the PUC and say it's not really a matter of taking the PUC to task. It's a matter of, again, freeing up the PUC to do its job. So the original law put into place in 2014 basically said, okay, PUC, figure out a mechanism to determine what areas are effectively competitive and then do it. And they did. They went through the first round, which gave us the 2.1, and as soon as they finished the second round, which would have given us about $10 to $12 million, they were sued, which stopped the process. They actually have a third and fourth round ready to go. So again, if this process can actually work its way through, they're ready to go to move forward. They've already identified, I mean, they can pretty much tell you exactly what areas are going to need it and what areas are not. So it's not a matter of the PUC being taken to task, it's a matter of saying the law basically gave the PUC the ability to do this. Now, unfortunately, the PUC is a regulatory body. There are very structured and very standard procedures that they have to go through. You know, if a standard procedure says it takes 2 months to do this, they can't shorten it and say 1 month, they can't push it back. Every entity has a right to comment, has a right to intervene. They can go through administrative procedures, and ultimately they can sue, which Bureau did sue. So really in terms of getting money into the broadband fund, the PUC has been very supportive of that, and they're trying to do that, very much so. The PUC is actually appointed, so the PUC is 3 members appointed by the governor. Whatever party the governor is, appoints 2 from his party or her party, and then 1 from the other. So right now there's 2 Democrats and 1 Republican on the PUC. There are 2 brand new commissioners that were just ratified, I think, a week ago. So the good news is one of them does have telecom experience. That's been one of probably the biggest issue, in that most of the commissioners come from the power and the transportation side of things. But I believe a woman, I don't know her name. I don't know, Jim, do you know? Yes, she came from Charter. So she came from Charter Communications, so she has a background in telecom, which is a good thing. So the PUC is not the problem. What Senator Donovan's bill tried to do was eliminate some of the gray area, because the PUC does have to go through a procedure and basically say, okay, we're going to take away kind of the gray area and we're going to tell you what is competitive and what is not competitive, rather than the PUC going through kind of a subjective process. What her bill was going to say is, we're going to tell you what is competitive and not competitive, which would have basically just streamlined the process. So yeah, I thought that bill was going to die. I was on the road all day yesterday, so I did not hear that. So that is something that is an option that there's been a lot of conversation about, is, okay, do we take it out of the PUC's hands, not because they're not doing their job, but because they are who they are, and we want to make it more clear and basically say, this is how much we want for broadband, this is how much we want for voice. So those conversations have come up. And then into your second part of your question, the makeup of the broadband fund, the board actually is, as I mentioned, I think it's very good. So we have, as I mentioned, about 6 providers from the telecom community, 4 state employees, and then the rest are rural and urban folks, as I mentioned. We have a small business owner from Yuma County. We have the ex-mayor of Bayfield. We have the economic development person from Steamboat Springs. We have a Park County commissioner. We have a Douglas County commissioner. And then we have, again, the head of the CTN. So we've got a large group of folks that make a good, have a good representation. The one issue we have run into is, and I don't think the folks that created the board really thought this through, was the conflict of interest. So we have had a problem in that 2 of the board members, Vero and CenturyLink, actually asked for money from the broadband fund to do projects. They were very valid projects. Both of them got money, but we kind of realized, we said, oh, wait a minute, we have a public board that's giving out public money, and we have a member of the board asking for money from that board. Okay, we should probably, they should probably recuse themselves. And then we realized, oh, we also have AT&T and Comcast, and I don't really think CenturyLink wants Comcast, deciding whether or not CenturyLink is, so we realized that just by trying to integrate the telecommunications experience, we ran into a lot of issues with the state ethics and conflicts of interest laws. And so that's probably been the #1 thing we've had to wrestle with, is the fact that the way the board was set up and the people that are going to ask us for money, there's an inherent conflict of interest. So we're trying to figure that out moving forward to kind of streamline that process a bit better.
And I just want to correct one thing I said. The Donovan's bill went down in committee, and the vote in the committee was 5 members, all front range, that voted against, and the rural representatives on that voted for. So it's interesting, the makeup of those committees and some of the interests where, the front range, where it's affordable, it's ubiquitous, and it's the playing field is a lot more equal, shot that down versus the rural side, where it's really necessary to increase the funding for that broadband infrastructure fund. So
Yeah, I think that is an interesting observation. I believe it was the same committee that voted down the Senate Bill 152 repeal. And I think at some point, one of the individuals that testified actually brought that up to the committee, that it was ironic. I believe there was, of the 7 of them, there was one non-urban person, deciding. So that is completely out of our hands. I would really encourage you to talk to your elected officials about that. So.
Please. Speaking.
Brian, thank you very much for speaking today. I appreciate this because it's kind of a passion of me and Jack's. We're from northern Round County. Tim stated that we do have a broadband strategic plan, but it only goes to government facilities, schools, and it goes to the fire stations, like I said, for the first responders and stuff, and that's really important. However, I just want to kind of stress a little more in northern Round County, just to tell you the scope of the rural businesses that are from up there. We have the owner of Hunt's Trucking. Me and my wife own a trucking company based out of Texas and Oklahoma. We also are logistics people for Coors. And so we have not only the logistics management, but we also have a large fleet of trucking that we have. When I retired 2 years ago from the government, I moved up to Steamboat Springs Ranch. I call it God's country, and Tim can attest to that. But just to let you know the scope of how much we're paying compared to what I paid in Centennial. I used to live right by Cherry Creek Reservoir. I pay roughly about $250 a month for cell coverage and also a minimum of 25 megs to run my business continuous. In northern Routt County, we have some issues with the cell towers, with getting broadband up there. I pay $250 a month through Verizon, which is the only service we can get up there that really covers well. I pay $150 a month minimum to DirecTV because we have no infrastructure for other options like CenturyLink and so forth. And also, to get broadband to run our business, I pay between $150 and $300 a month for megs because I have to use the wireless hotspot through Verizon. There's no other options. I'm fortunate. We have Hunt's Trucking, we have Stranahan's, the people that are the inheritors of the Champion Spark Plugs. We have a lot of other Texas-based business that's moved up by Pearl Lake and Steamboat Lake, and ourselves, we moved up there. But we're paying, as you can see, in excess of $600 for what we used to pay $250 for. Now, we're fortunate, we can afford it. We have a business we have to run. But the local kids, we can't expect the kids to go down, track through the snow 5 miles when mom's got 3 kids after school to go down to the school to get continuous fiber. What is the plan? And with this scope, just to let you know, they also say that school kids, according to the Department of Education, that kids that don't have internet have like a 20% less test score from what I've been reading. Now, you folks are more knowledgeable than I am with that. But for telecommunications, social distancing for the government, I worked as an exec officer in the federal government, and we used to have Telecom because, let's say, for instance, we have a pandemic, and the business can't shut down, the government can't shut down. What is it going to take to get the fiber and the cable to not only off the main roads, but into these people's houses? What do we need to do as a community to help facilitate that?
So I think the issue you bring up is a classic case study. And the problem we run into is, again, I go back to the fact that there is no requirement for anyone to offer you broadband whatsoever.
Yes, sir.
And so what we're trying to do is say, okay, can we cobble together a lot of different ideas, a lot of funding sources? So I'll go back to your point about Steamboat. Steamboat was one of the early adopters and really one of the leaders in terms of using the DOLA funds, and your school district IT gentleman up there, Tim Miles, has been a leader in that and really thought something through. The problem is the DOLA money that we had by law could only go to local governments, and it was for middle mile infrastructure. So that's what Tim did, and he also worked with some of the federal programs to get middle mile infrastructure. Now, that middle mile infrastructure has a requirement that it's open access. So, which means that whoever owns it, in your case, the nonprofit that runs that, has to offer that infrastructure to anyone at reasonable prices, the same prices. So if AT&T wants to come in and use it, they pay the same that Bob's Telecom does, small, And so the idea is that hopefully, now that you have that middle mile infrastructure, someone can come into the broadband fund and say, hey, I can tap into that infrastructure that's sitting at, north on Highway 40 at the edge of Steamboat, and I can at least get some wireless signal up to Steamboat Lake and get some folks some basic broadband for a lot cheaper. And that money, because the money in the broadband fund, again, by law, has to go to private companies. So that's what we're trying to basically, again, the fact that we as the state have no authority to tell anyone what to do or how to do it, what we're trying to do is say, okay, we've got a piece of wood over here, we've got a couple nails over here, we've got an old piece of concrete over here, can we start to build a house, all right? Now, it'd be a lot better if we had a whole truck full of cement and wood and we had a whole crew to come up and just build it, but we don't. And so what we're trying to do is provide you guys as local stakeholders the tools as we can to help build it organically. Knowing that in the long term, and again, when I first started in this job 5 years ago, I told a lot of people, this is not an overnight thing. I know you guys want this overnight, but for sustainability, it needs to be organic and it needs to be long-term sustainable. And I think what we've seen is people that are we want people that are interested in serving Steamboat, not for tomorrow, not for the next day, for the next 20 years. And that's what we're starting to see. We're starting to see people come in by helping both large and small companies, provide them the resources. We look at Rio Blanco County, what they've done. They have some of the best broadband probably in the state now in Rio Blanco County. And it's by people that wanted to serve that area. And so that's what we're focusing on, is trying to build that grassroots support and build companies that want to do that. It's not your school thing, that's one of the reasons we're focusing on the school. I completely agree with you. So the governor mentioned the story when I first started out with the Delta, and the library in Delta left their lights on so kids can come down and do homework. And no one in the governor's office believed it was true. I said, absolutely, it's true. It happens all the time as well. So I completely agree with you, and we're trying to work on that. I'm actually working with the feds right now, starting in December of this year, the Lifeline program, which is traditionally subsidized cell phone service for companies, or for individuals, is now going to subsidize broadband for low-income folks. So they'll get a $10 subsidy on their broadband bill every month. And so we as the state are working with the feds to create a mechanism to allow individuals to get certified much quicker for that program. So that low-income individuals can at least get $10 off their broadband bill. $10 is not a silver bullet, but hey, it's $10 for some people that, that might go a long way. So again, we're just trying to pull together all the available tools we have to try to figure something out.
Great, thank you.
We have a few more minutes for Brian. Is there anyone on the phone? We'll just take a break here. Does anyone on the phone have a comment or question for Brian? I think that's a no. Any other questions or comments for Brian? Please, Ray.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Ray Beck, Moffett County. As I think probably everybody in the room is familiar with Senate Bill 152 and how that impacted the local government from providing those relationships with public-private partnerships. So I would imagine, I don't know what the percentage is here in western Colorado where that was put on the ballot and people basically repealed it. So Moffett County, and Craig is one of those, as you know, you're probably well educated on that. And so we did go through our planning process in terms of the survey, and we did get a planning grant from DOLA. And you are correct, there is still money available through mineral lease and service tax dollars if you apply for that and you're in one of those impacted communities, if you go through the tier process. And so as we move forward on this, I was wondering through the state broadband board that you are on, can you apply for that? And if you do, I would imagine you have to have some kind of plan in progress, or at least a plan to present to you guys in order to be awarded that money. And can you use any of that money to as seed money for DOLA as well?
So again, the broadband fund has to go to private companies, so it's a little bit different. So the DOLA money goes to local governments. The broadband fund money goes to private companies. So now that is not to prevent a local government working with a private company to come in and say, we have an idea to do this, as long as the private company is the one that comes in and says, we want the infrastructure. Again, I'll go back to Shephard County and Park County, are kind of following that model where they're using their local governments to kind of provide a baseline and then working with private companies to come in and say, you guys finish the job, you guys do everything. So the way it works is anyone that's interested in funding, once we open up the funding cycle, that you have to present a full plan. I mean, you can't just come in and say, I want $1 million so I can serve this area. You have to show us how. The people that came this first round, showed us network diagrams, where are your tower locations, how are you going to put fiber in, do you have the easements already, in place, what's your business model? We want to make sure, we fund sustainable business models. So we ask for financial, what's your projections, what's your take rate? If you're coming in and saying, we're anticipating a 90% take rate, we might say, that's not, if you're coming in and saying, we're counting on a 40% take rate, well, it's okay, hey, that makes sense. So absolutely, you have to come in to get this money. You have to present a strong business case because, again, we want to be good stewards of public money to do that. But no, there's nothing that would prevent a local government working with a private company to implement a kind of overarching solution that would include money from the broadband fund.
Thank you. All right, Patty.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for coming all this way. We appreciate that. A quick question, just a clarification in my head. The DOLA money is middle mile. The broadband money, is it last mile or can it also be middle mile and last mile?
Great question. So the way the statute reads, and the broadband fund, again, there was like 16 different things where the legislature said, you should give consideration to this. And some of them made a lot of sense. Like, it said you should make sure that you have wide geographic disbursement of the funds. Hey, that makes a lot of sense. Some of them basically, we kind of were left scratching our head going, what the heck did they mean with that? And that's one of the issues is that, so it's the statute reads, it is primarily for last mile. But we've had a lot of the folks come in and for the projects say, well, I can't get the last mile until I finish the middle mile piece. Maybe that's a community where they said, hey, I got to put fiber from Montrose to Ridgeway, and then I can get Ridgeway. But technically Montrose to Ridgeway is middle mile, so would you fund the entire project? And I think that's one of the areas we're going to kind of refine. And the way we're kind of interpreting it is, as long as the ultimate goal of the project, and as long as it actually provides last mile service to the users, we understand that a last mile implementation is likely to have a middle mile component as part of it. So.
Thanks.
Other questions, comments for Brian? Please, Cindy.
Cindy Dozier, Hinsdale County. In a small rural area, you are not going to get a good business model. How does that fit with this whole process?
So I think our approach has been that when you look at most, when we talk to people that do this for a living, again, ranging anywhere from the CenturyLinks and the Comcast and AT&Ts down to the Deeply Digitals and the Mountain Broadbands, they will say that the reason the business case doesn't make sense is the capital cost. If I put my capital in, I gotta have a return on investment. And if you're telling me it's gonna cost me $1 million and I've got 200 users, that just, economics don't matter. So that's what our philosophy has been, is to say, okay, if we can take that $1 million and give you a grant to shrink that $1 million down to $500,000, could you then make the business case for that, or $250,000? And I think that's what we're looking at, is to say, historically, the subsidization programs for phones and electricity and everything has basically been, okay, tell us how much it's going to cost per month, tell us how much you're going to get, based on standard rates, and then we'll make up that difference and make you whole. The problem is that doesn't really incent anyone to invest anything, because you're not subsidizing investment, you're subsidizing operations. And so what we've said, and I think a lot of the thinking, even at the FCC with the New Connect America Fund, is saying, look, we're not gonna pay you a check every month. What we're gonna do is help you get the infrastructure in the ground to make the business case, and then once we do that, you need to be on your own. If we give you $500,000 to get the infrastructure in, you should be able to make a business case at that point to do that. And so that's, especially now in Hinsdale County, it's even going to be more difficult. You're absolutely right. And that's where we would look at, I know Ophir is another town, we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to Marble. Those are going to take a lot of money. But again, I think, I believe the model will work, that if we can lower the barriers, lower that initial capital cost to get the infrastructure in the ground, you can make a business case moving forward. Especially if you can group together multiple towns, so.
Eddie?
Something you said brought up another question. So, on the broadband fund, is there a minimum match?
Yes, so the broadband fund is basically a dollar for dollar match. So yeah.
50/50.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Well, thank you, Brian. I thank you for coming all the way over, and good opportunity to get you to the Western Slope. Sounds like you had some great meetings yesterday.
That's right. And as always, please feel free to call me if you want to go deeper on this stuff. If you want me to come out to your town, your county, whatever your school district, we're always willing to come out. So please just let us know, and we enjoy coming out here and actually talk with you guys face to face. So
thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Next up, Monica Miriam. Hi, Monica. Thanks for joining us. I'll let you come up and maybe use Brian's mic.
Good morning, thank you. I'm gonna apologize up front, I'm getting over bronchitis and I meant to bring my bottle of water up in case I get into a coughing fit. But thank you.
We'll get you one.
I'm sorry?
We'll get you some.
I actually have a bottle back there by Kimberly. Let me just grab it just in case I do have a coughing fit. Again, thank you all for inviting me to come and talk to you about potentially the state of 911 in Colorado. I chair the 911 Advisory Task Force to the PUC. What's been happening with 911 in the state of Colorado? In the last several years, we've been putting some concerted efforts in upgrading and updating the rules and statutes surrounding the governance and funding for 911 in Colorado. Current rules and statute are 20 plus years old. And you can imagine in today's world where we're trying to conduct business, those rules and statutes are extremely outdated. We've been really struggling with coming to some collaborative solutions with telcos. In 2014, legislation passed, as you guys know, to deregulate telecommunications in the state of Colorado. And last year, through Senate Bill 16-183, the telecommunications companies attempted to deregulate 911 service on top of that. We were successful in blocking that legislation. A separate committee was formed from some agreements with the governor's office and the Senate Majority Leader. And ultimately, the report that came out from that legislative effort put together another task force, or committee, if you will, that's being stood up as we speak underneath the Department of Public Safety, Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, with representatives from the 911 community, our public safety partners, the Colorado Chiefs of Police, the Colorado Sheriff's Association, our Fire Chiefs Association, our EMS community, along with partners in the industry, whether they're the BESP, CenturyLink, some of our VoIP providers and such will be the makeup of this new committee that's being tasked with finding a solution, an agreed upon solution from a governance and funding and transition to take our legacy 911 network in Colorado to an IP-based network, what we call Next Generation 911. And I find it super helpful that I followed Brian in this whole kind of presentation of information, because what are the challenges for us in Western Colorado are the very things that you guys spoke to. The broadband infrastructure in rural Colorado is exactly what we will have to have in the 911 world to transmit data, photos, video, and other packets of information that the consumer telco market is selling to the public, right? General public thinks that their devices, because of what we in the 911 world feel are miscommunications in marketing, that just because their device can do it, we can receive the data. And that is absolutely not the case. In the state of Colorado, we are fortunate. How many of you have text to 911 in your community, or even know if you do? Yeah. So In Colorado, we've been successful in the I-25 and I-70 corridors in implementing, so about 70% of the population has access to that service, but only about 40% of the territory has access to that service. It's an interesting deal for our hearing impaired and deaf community. That's their primary method of communication. No longer do they use the old teletype devices that used to be 10, 20 years ago provided to the hearing impaired and deaf community. They use texting and video conferencing. If a state or a 911 center does not provide that level of service, they are almost completely cut off from public safety services. The state of Arizona is currently being sued by the ACLU because none of their 911 centers offer text to 911 solution. So in Colorado, as one of the 58 authorities in Colorado who manage the 911 system, we have made every effort to bring awareness to our 911 partners to make sure they know how to get the service so that they can offer it to their community. I spoke to the fact that there are 58 different government bodies that manage the 911 system here in Colorado. That in and of itself is a great argument for the telecoms as to why it's difficult to do business with us. So this subcommittee that's been made up, there's hopes that we come to some resolution in helping them conduct business in our state and providing 911 service, because it is very challenging. We all even have different 911 surcharge rates. So county or authority by authority, it ranges from 40 cents to $1.75, depending on where you live in the state of Colorado, as to how much you're paying. So if you can imagine the difficulties that this presents for the carriers. So let's just take CenturyLink, for instance. They're the vendor of last resort, as Brian named them, in many parts of it, almost the whole state. But they have to have different billing amounts depending for the entire state of Colorado, depending on where they live. So if any of you are business owners in trying to collect revenues and disseminate them back to the receivers, you can imagine how challenging that is for them, right? Governance, funding. So the only state in the union that has successfully transferred to the IP-based network for their 911 system is the state of Washington. Other states are partway through their projects, but the state of Colorado, we do not have any money, nor do we have a plan to do so. And again, this subcommittee is what we're hoping will, made up of carriers, 911 professionals, and public safety professionals, will put together a plan this year to help us migrate. Excuse me. 85% of all 911 calls in this state are received from a wireless device. But as Brian pointed out, we still have people in our community who will stick to and hang on to landline telephony, because number one, it's probably the easiest way to get their phone call through, because the wireless or broadband network isn't set up for them to, maybe they live in top of the hill in Marble and they don't even hardly get cell phone coverage, right? Excuse me. So I kind of spoke to what our challenges have been in the last few years in trying to update our statute to change our funding. CenturyLink about 3 years ago gave an estimate to the PUC about the transition of the 911 network costs and how it would increase from our traditional telephony to an IP-based network. And they said that they think on average it'll be 5 or 6 times more than what we are currently paying for 911 service from our basic emergency service provider. Our monies today are not enough for some of our communities, some of those 58 authorities, to pay their 911 bills back to the carriers, and they supplement that through either their general funds or some other mechanism, depending on the community that you live in. And when I talk about 911 service, the big challenge for us, think of this in two different ways. Your surcharge money that comes on your cell phone bill or your landline bill is really, in a lot of cases, what pays for the infrastructure of the system. In most cases in your community, the actual operations are subsidized or paid for by your community's county or municipal general funds. And in my jurisdiction, here in Grand Junction, our public safety agencies contribute to that. And everybody's we all are, there's some government folks here. We all know what the funding situation has been in the last few years, and everybody's funds and resources are extremely limited, but we're trying to get at the same money that our public safety partners are. And it's been a real challenge for years and years and years. Next week, the National Association is going to Washington. A big challenge for 911 also, many of you may not know this, we do not have equal access to public safety grants. We are not considered equal public safety partners in the federal and state statutes of grant awards. So when we talk about grants that may be available to police, fire, and medical, we've been fighting at the national level for the last several years with our federal representatives to ask them to define 911. We are the tip of the public safety spear, right? Without us, you can't even get public safety service in most cases. But we don't have equal access to those grant monies. So, how do we move forward? We have this subcommittee. We're kind of stalled right now, based on trying to get this committee put together and move forward in defining how we're going to transition the 911 system to an IP-based network. In the rural parts of this state, the things that are going to make us even able to do that is we're going to be piggybacking on the efforts that Brian spoke to, these broadband efforts. We don't have enough money or resources in our state or any state that I'm aware of to create different silos or different broadband pipelines, if you will, to move all of these data and voice packets through. So our hope, and we've been in conversations with Brian and his FirstNet efforts, is that in the rural parts of our state, we'll be able to either prioritize or piggyback onto their infrastructure. And we've had great conversations with them on how we can do that, because in rural Colorado, we just don't have the resources that are available in the metro area. The other challenge for us in the battle with the telecommunications companies and their efforts to deregulate 911 service is they want to shop the communities where they provide service. The beauty of the system in Colorado, when it was set up, is that it's an average service that is provided equally across the state. And if we allow the telecommunications companies to shop that service, we all know what's going to happen. The smaller rural communities are going to be left behind. It will become more costly for them to build up the infrastructure than if we allow the carriers to shop the metro area and provide service where the highest number of population lives. Some of our 911 community partners have made some really great strides in coming up with some creative funding solutions for their centers. Is there somebody here from Summit County? No? Summit County, to have one of the highest surcharge rates in the state, their public safety agencies were struggling in funding their 911 center, but they came up with they put an additional fee on their lift tickets. And those monies go, so talk about a way to maybe attach a fee to those people who come and play in their community and become a drain on their public safety services without impacting the population that lives there. And that was a great way for them to come up with some additional funding. So we're just trying to get really creative in coming up with different opportunities to provide monies for the 911 system. Because guess what? 911 was the best advertising campaign the federal government ever launched, right? Who doesn't think that they're supposed to have 911 service? We teach it to our kids from the time they're itty bitty, and we just expect it to work and expect it to be there, so. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. So, this little subcommittee that we have created from the legislation from last session, the agreement with the governor's office is that the carriers will not present any new deregulatory legislation while this committee is active, in hopes that the committee comes to some plan and solution for improving 911 service in our state. So currently in this session, there's no pending legislation. And I really don't have more information than that because we're kind of in this limbo phase. It's been a real battle. Brian did speak to, we have some new commissioners. We have a meeting with them in a couple of weeks and hoping to educate them. The 911 Advisory Task Force is currently trying to take the old rules, sitting down with our telecommunications partners and trying to once again update the rules surrounding the regulatory language for us. But we'll see how that effort conflicts with this subcommittee. So that was a lot of really confusing information. What can I answer for you guys?
Jennifer?
So I just first, I have a question and I have a clarification. So just to clarify first, so Senate Bill 183 last year was not an attempt to deregulate 911. It was an effort led by the legislature to clarify what they had meant in the 2014 legislation. And in fact, it was in response to what was happening at the PUC with rulemaking, and specifically the legislators who had authored the 2014 legislation had sent a letter to the PUC saying, what you're trying to do is not the intent of the legislation, and we believe it's outside the scope of the legislation. And so Senate Bill 183 was not an attempt to deregulate 911, and I would say that from the carrier perspective, there was no interest in deregulating 911. And so, you know, I would also, the governor's office also had sent a letter saying, we believe this rulemaking is going too far. And so I think it's, anytime someone, you know, I think we get a little concerned about the argument saying that we don't want regulation of 911. And in fact, as of today, the ESP is regulated, and we all agree that the ESP should be regulated. And so from that perspective, one thing that concerned me is that I heard, if I heard you correctly, the argument that the carriers can shop communities where we want to provide service. And that's the first I've heard of that. From our perspective, we don't get to pick and choose where 911 is provided. And certainly, frankly, even if we could, I don't know a lot of folks who would choose a service that didn't provide 911. So I'm curious what you're alluding to with that statement.
Yeah, so today you're absolutely right that you cannot do that. So in conversations at our advisory task force, carriers such as AT&T and Verizon have made public statements in our meetings about their desire to offer service where they so wish to offer service. So again, the carriers haven't been completely transparent with us or clear, and for whatever reasons, we haven't been able to come to the table and speak openly and honestly with one another. So conversations, public hearings, or public meetings, they've spoken to the requirement in the state of Colorado. If you're going to be certified as a basic emergency service provider today, in today's world, you have to be able to provide that service unilaterally across the board, right? In future, we have been advised through our task force that the carriers would not, the certification process, they don't want to be limited to that. They don't want to be restrained by that. So we interpret that to mean that they want to shop where population, where they're gonna get the highest level of profit for their service.
So I can tell you on behalf of AT&T, we're not interested in shopping where we can provide 911 service. In fact, I don't even think AT&T spoke at the proceedings, but we certainly are not interested in shopping. And in working with the telecommunications industry, this is an industry that is committed to 911. Frankly, from a business perspective, it makes a whole lot of business sense because nobody is buying my service if we can't connect you to 911. And so certainly there's challenges in the universe on how that works, but I do get a little concerned when I hear the argument that we want to pick and choose where and where not we would provide service. And again, I would just put the reminder out there that we are not attempting to deregulate 911, but I think as of today, the ESP is regulated. Everyone agrees that should continue to be a regulated entity. And so I think I would hope we're all on the same page on that. But we have great interest in providing 911 service.
So kind of to some of the points that she and I are discussing, the point of the proposed rules that got stalled by the governor 2 years ago. So we have a basic emergency service provider in Colorado for 911 service, and where the rules started to reach farther than our current language gives the opportunity is what we call other originating service providers. So providers like Charter, AT&T, Verizon. So think of it this way. They're the carriers in between let me see, me and technology, where did Brian go? You have a device, you pay AT&T, I'll just use you as an example, for your service. You call 911, AT&T routes that, but CenturyLink provides the routing to get the call to the 911 center. Does that make sense? I'm probably oversimplifying, but I'm trying to do that to make people understand. The challenge for those of us in the 911 world, not discounting rules or whatever, is that these other carriers, these other wireless service providers are having outages and problems that are impacting a citizen's ability to contact 911. Currently, under FCC, federal regulation, an outage reporting requirement to the carriers is 900,000 minutes. So imagine how that plays out in our communities, especially in rural Colorado. If a service provider such as AT&T has some kind of outage, something, according to FCC, according to the feds, they do not have to tell anybody anything unless it meets a 900,000 minute threshold. Lakewood, Colorado, 2 years ago, Verizon had an outage that affected 1.3 million people, but it still did not meet the minute threshold to report the outage down to the PUC or through those channels so that the 911 PSAP, Public Safety Answer Point, could get the information so that, not so we could leverage punitive damages or language against the carriers, but so that we could tell the community or tell them they had to find a different means to communicate with us if they had an emergency. So there's been a lot of dialogue and challenges between us and the carriers about their feelings are that the federal regulatory oversight from the FCC for the wireless carriers is the only place they need to be regulated at. And our argument in the state has been we have example upon example of communities because they don't meet such that high threshold outage reporting, and we need to be able to tell our citizens an alternative method to communicate with public safety so they can get emergency services. So again, as you can see, we come to these crossroads of not understanding what we need to do as far as information. what they want as far as regulatory oversight, and us trying to ensure that we have seamless service to the community. So, I think I oversimplified or not, but that's the challenge.
No, and I actually, the 900,000 minute threshold rule, I think the providers have come to the table and said, no, we understand that concern, and we want to have a conversation about that concern. Other states have gotten a lot farther along in these conversations than we have, and those states typically don't have a regulatory body standing between the providers and the PSAPs. And so our concern is that trying to drag the regulatory process in between us and you actually creates more of an impediment than moving toward the future than it does actually assisting in the problem. And if we look at other states, the way that the state of Colorado is set up from a 911 perspective is very different than many other states in the way the conversations are happening between the PSAPs, the emergency services community, and the providers. And there is literally somebody standing between us and you all in the middle of that conversation, and we're not seeing progress because of that. And so I think our argument is we want to have this conversation. I think that this is a fair conversation. We really want to have it, and we have come to the table on it. The concern is that when we start to pull the PUC in the middle of it, the statute says that that's not where they belong, and B, we would rather be at the table having a productive conversation directly and coming to agreements directly. And that's something that we've worked on in other states, like Washington, in fact. And we want to have that sort of productive relationship here in the state of Colorado, and that happens with conversations like this. And I think this is a healthy conversation to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the 911 community's frustration is that we have never seen the PUC as that, maybe as conflicting as perhaps the carriers do for us, because everything we've asked for, we've gotten. But that may not be fair necessarily to the carriers. So again, as she alluded to, there's only 6 states in this country that manage a 911 system similarly to the way we do. Most states have some kind of state level, whether it's a coordination office or actually part of the state government infrastructure. And being Colorado and home rule, that I'm going to tell you right now, the 911 authorities are not on board with that at all. So we've tried to come up with maybe some compromise language that we have a coordination effort through maybe the Department of Public Safety or some other entity, again, to try to appease and compromise with our carrier partners because they're so anti-PUC and regulatory. They have felt there's been so much conflict in trying to control the rules surrounding offering 911 service in this state. So again, we're hoping that this new committee offers us an opportunity to collaborate further, but too many of our 911 authorities have had problems with revenue issues and the state withholding money for all kinds of reasons that the idea of a state level office is very unpopular. A coordination effort could be better sold, and there are models across this country. One that the 911 community is in favor of is North Carolina has a pretty good model where there's a board where the carriers and the 911 community and even our public safety partners have representation. I don't really understand what their regulatory language is in North Carolina or if any exists, but I think it's more on service level agreement, contractual basis kind of efforts instead of official PUC oversight, Public Utility Commission oversight. So.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks again for coming. I've been involved in this conversation around broadband in the state for quite some time, and I have a colleague, Matt Gesh, who is one of your colleagues as well. We work together fairly well, but in many of the conferences that I attend in the state, specifically Mountain Connect, We don't hear a lot of talk or see a lot of presence from the PSAPs and the emergency coordinators, communication coordinators throughout the state. I'd certainly love to see more participation. I think we have a lot of common goals that we could perhaps move together faster in making these middle mile networks connected, not just building out middle mile networks to a region, but connecting regions together. I think with our outages to emergency communications that we had, the plague of outages that we had last year, the idea of increasing redundancy and geodiversification of our networks is critical. People are not being served well by not having these connections and diverse connections. So I think there's a lot of opportunity that we could work together as we're building these regional networks and then connecting regional networks. We should be in the same room talking about it as well.
Yeah, and to your point, sir, the 911 community hasn't done a great job. We've done much better in the recent past as far as collaborating and reaching out to our community partners, because quite frankly, the technology is making us do that. We don't have funding to create these networks or to create this infrastructure. The 911 surcharge mechanism is not substantially enough to help us build those broadband pathways. And so we need to develop these partnerships. We need to talk to, look, communication centers are expensive. They're very expensive. They're probably even in some cases more expensive than some of your police departments or fire agencies are to function because of the technology, the difficulties in recruiting and retaining personnel. It is a very expensive operation. The technology is providing us avenues to regionalize, but we have to get past those political barriers to make that happen. There's a lot of opportunity for us to become much more efficient and effective in delivering 911 service to our citizens. But there's a lot of battles to be fought. And we do have our carriers. I mean, the technology that they are providing to the consumer market, there's all kinds of new ways, but again, in the rural parts of this state, that technology doesn't exist. So we have to find ways to make sure that happens so that we can get that service to our citizens and then provide that pathway as a 911 avenue for public safety resources. So, did I totally confuse everybody?
Time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, 911 is a very complex issue. It is not a simple, straightforward.
Please use the mic if you could. Thank you.
One of the things we talked about here at Mesa County with the city about a month, 2 months ago, whatever it was, with the technology, that's great. But where you used to get a few calls on the same issue, they're flooded with hundreds of calls on the very same issue. And I don't know how you cure that, but it makes it very difficult for 911 people.
Right, so the more passive technology that allow a citizen to access 911, the more challenging it becomes for the operations side of the house. I would tell you on average, a 911 center, because of wireless, we get 5 more calls for every 1 call we used to get on landline technology. 5 to 1. Somebody still has to answer the phone. Somebody still has to answer that text message. Somebody still has to respond to the citizen. So operationally, the impact has grown exponentially, but we have not built in staffing models because, again, we don't have the funding or the resources to support the ability to answer that phone. I will tell you, in Mesa County, we are the only PSAP. In the month of January, are you ready for this? In the month of January, our telephone call volume, telephone calls only, was up 18% over January of last year. That's a lot of telephone calls. In our center, we managed probably around 1,200 telephone calls a day. But an 18% increase in 1 month over the same month last year. I mean, I think the weather was a little warmer and maybe people were just out a little more, but oh my goodness, how do how do you get enough people to answer the phones? It's kind of crazy, and my center is no different than what's happening across the state.
You're gonna have technology that the call on north and north has been received, abort the other call. I don't know how you do it, but
Right.
we're gonna have something like that, I would think.
Well, in the larger urban centers, people are on hold. I mean, that's the sad reality. And I mean, I don't think our community or none of our smaller communities are prepared to tell their constituents or their citizens, we're gonna put you on, here's hold music, and some of that elevator, lovely tunes come across their phone, they will be flabbergasted or appalled.
I don't really have much to add to this conversation, but it gives me an opportunity to whine about these costs. And in Routt County's case, our E911 center costs about $2.1 million a year to run. And we receive about $425,000 a year off of the surcharge. We are supplementing that with close to $1.7 million a year of property tax.
Monica, have you heard, the way that we're paying for E911 services? Obviously, you talked about it's changing. Is there any, other than you mentioned the lift tickets surcharge, I think that's genius. Have you heard of any other great examples of alternative forms of funding this?
I don't know if they're great examples, but they're solutions. Our adjacent Garfield County, back when our economies were more robust, actually passed a public safety sales tax. And their communication center gets a percentage of that, as does, I believe, their public safety agencies and their library. But they passed that legislation at a time when the economy was booming, and I think the citizenry didn't feel so impacted by voting in I think it's a 0.25% sales tax increase. And again, talk about rural Colorado, and a great deal of the people that impact our public safety services are the tourism industry that come into our communities. In some cases, in Pitkin County at Aspen Center, their population changes from 35,000 to 300,000, depending if they're hosting the X Games or some other big alpine ski event. And the impact of their services and the ability to tax those people who actually burden the system, the sales tax solution has been seen as favorable from that perspective. In rural Colorado, property tax solutions are not as favorable because then you're not reaching the people who are commuting in and out of your area and impacting your services. So we haven't come up with a lot of different ones. I will tell you, we have a gentleman coming to the advisory task force in March, their public meetings, to speak to are you ready for this? A per hotel room fee that would be leveraged across the state, and then those monies could be transferred down to the communities, those hotels. Now, this is just an idea. I'm probably scared the bejesus out of the Visitor Convention Bureau, the chambers, and everybody else, but we are just trying to find different solutions to fund 911 service in our communities, and this is how wild and out of the box we're getting because there's no monies anywhere to support the service.
So, one of the things that's coming to our attention at Colorado College is the impact of the Gallagher Amendment, which is basically dealing with property taxes and what has been going on the Front Range, and how it's going to be rippling across and affecting all the other taxing districts and counties, the fire departments, and such. So looking at those alternatives to fund this type of service has got to happen, because unfortunately, if a fire district or like CMC or any other taxing district is impacted by Gallagher, those funds never come back because of taper. So unless you went to the voters and said, gee, would you like to increase your taxes? We know how well that will probably fly given our current environment economically and politically. So I think the idea, I was sitting here thinking, we'll lift tickets, I thought the hotel thing too. I mean, it wouldn't have to be much to have a major impact, but I think that's smart thinking in terms of providing for a service that has to be there.
And we're talking about this idea that we're knocking around on the per hotel room line fee, our room fee. We're talking less than 50 cents. I mean, we're not talking dollars, we're talking pennies on the dollar to continue to provide an essential service to our citizens. And we think that's more palatable, but again, our electeds and the officials that govern us, that's who we have to convince, because the general funds are empty, the coffers are empty. You guys know this. The technology we need to transition to is very expensive. The more rurally we're located, the more expensive it costs to get the technology there. But this is the way we're doing business today. Again, I said 85% of all of 911 business in Colorado is through wireless. They want us to receive their pictures on their phone, they want us to send us their video, and we cannot accept it. The 911 centers do not have the technology to receive that data, so.
Well, Monica, thank you so much for the conversation, and thanks to all the speakers. It is 11 o'clock, and I want to honor those that would like us to stay on time. We do have lunch. Nicole will probably have some announcements for us, but thanks for being here today. We started a half hour early, and hopefully that worked well for everyone. It certainly was easier to get all of our discussion in. I think we had a great dialogue today, and thank you all for participating in that. Nicole?
Thanks everybody for coming. Just to echo Virgil's announcement, food is available in the back. And then I also wanted to repeat that if you need to use the restroom in between our meetings, we do have key cards. Are they by you, Jordan? Okay, they're right by the front door. You will have to use those to break into the bathrooms. So just swipe those on the little black box up by the main door, and that'll allow you access to those. Thanks, guys. We'll re-adjourn at noon for our healthcare committee meeting. Thank you.